Thanks, Elmarie, and hello, everyone. My name is Tom Wells, and I'm Chief Disruption Officer at Synthesis. I look after an area called Synthesis Labs, which is really the mechanism in which we can break out of the mold of our business as usual and focus on building exponential ideas with our customers. As you've seen through all the previous presentations, Synthesis has a really strong value proposition, which has up until today been really successful. We're super proud of what we've achieved, and we're even more proud of our leadership teams and operating divisions as they continue to push boundaries and grow into the future. But what is the mechanism which Synthesis uses to ensure that it stays ahead of the constant pace of change of technologies? Well, that's where Synthesis Labs comes in. It's really a small and targeted area of concern within the business whose responsibility it is to look forward into the future and bring some of these ideas back and apply them to the challenges of today. It's hard to define the particular concrete thing that we focus on in our labs area because it's really an investment into future innovative or disruptive ideas, which are by their very nature hard to define. And so our focus is more on capability of our team and our organizational ability to adapt to change. For me, this is as simple as an investment in core foundational technologies and processes that we know will be a necessary part of our future. Some of these are obvious, such as cloud technology, digital user experience, and machine learning, tip of the iceberg. And our task as part of the labs area is to dig deeper below the surface and look at the next layer that is slowly starting to emerge. These are what we would call the next generation differentiators. Some of them are abstract and hard to imagine. Others are very obvious. Either way, they are just ideas, and only time will tell whether they are good or not. So I've got a laundry list of things I could talk to you about, ranging from real-time data streaming platforms, hyperscale computing architectures of the future, to blockchain, the rise of pure functional programming, extended reality, and even our view on how quantum computing will impact everything. But unfortunately, I only have a few minutes, so I'm going to focus on 3 ideas, which I think are pretty interesting, coming up shortly. When working in the unknown, an open mindset is the most useful characteristic to have. But of course, it's also very useful to have access to a large toolbox of tools, processes, and people which can be easily accessed. These are really handy to use as foundation or accelerators, allowing our team to get to the core challenge as soon as possible. We call this time to value. We are very fortunate at Synthesis to have recognized this idea very early on in our journey. And so we have a long history of investment in R&D over the years, which when looking back in retrospect has been absolutely key to shaping what the organization is like today. So what does the Synthesis organization of the future look like? I really don't know exactly, but one thing I'm sure of is that we are a constantly evolving organism with all of the right characteristics. As Mike defined it earlier in his presentation, he defined it as hungry, humble, and smart. However, structurally, we are not easily defined. We are ambitious, and we are seldom satisfied with what we've achieved to date. And so our structure really embodies this desire to explore and discover new opportunities. As a summary, Synthesis Labs really represents the investment into the capability of our teams to be able to build innovative and disruptive platforms in the unknown domain. This investment has 3 pillars. Number 1, hiring and training the right people. We value EQ, creativity, the entrepreneurial spirit. We foster individuals' ability to tell stories, and we work hard on developing individual technical skill. Secondly, process. We live by the agile software development process. We focus on highest business value first, and we build in the ability to pivot in all of our endeavors. The third one, technology. All of our projects have an element of R&D built into them. We have a dedicated focus on emerging technologies and experimentation, including a dedicated labs environment, which provides the space for deep research. So we don't have a lot of time to dive into detail, but I wanted to talk through 3 topics of the many that we have that I see as good fundamental ideas for where Synthesis may evolve or find opportunities next. So here's the first one, the reimagining of personalization and banking. And this one is so obvious because we all experience it every day, or rather I should say we all experience the lack of it every day. One of the big gaps we see in the market is the reality that typical banking applications are very far behind the standard that consumers have become accustomed to and have come to expect from their platforms in everyday life. For example, anyone who has ever been updated by Google on a delayed flight Anyone who has ever received a traffic update from Google telling you that your trip to work will be delayed or 5 minutes longer than usual based on your usual schedule. Or anyone who has ever been recommended a number of experiences you should consider when Airbnb detects that you are planning a visit to a new city. Or Facebook suggesting a friend to you based on your recent interaction on another platform, which seems a bit scary. Or being recommended a new album on Spotify or Tidal based on your listening preferences. Although these sound pretty obvious, they have had enormous impact on our society. Generally, people don't miss flights. Roads are better utilized. Time spent in traffic is minimized. People are more connected via Facebook. And discussing music to get recommendations from other people doesn't exist anymore. These inefficient parts of our society have been optimized by technology platforms. And the promise is that we can spend more quality time doing what we really want to do. But now pivot this personalization idea to banking. How core is your bank to your day-to-day life? Does your bank remind you on the last day of the month to pay your City of Johannesburg bill so that you don't get cut off? Does your bank provide you with savings recommendations for the few months leading into your annual holiday and begin by offering you the best price flights to your favorite destination? Does your bank recommend a petrol station to use, which will maximize your loyalty points based upon the fact that it can see when you last filled up your car? Does your bank maximize your interest by moving excess funds into higher interest-bearing accounts, but making sure that you still have enough float in your current account to buy groceries based on your previous spending behavior? I don't want to bash any specific banks, but mine certainly doesn't do any of these things. And these are just the super obvious ones. There are so many quality of life services that can be simply predicted by my transactional and spending habits. So what's the problem? We're not entirely sure, but one of the key issues to me is that banks have not yet pivoted to become customer-centric. They are still very much product-centric. They are still asking themselves, what is the best way to sell this product to my customer? Rather than what is the best thing I could do to serve my customer? The personal and behavioral data that the bank has got access to is an absolute treasure trove, and we believe hugely predictive of your behavior on a day-to-day, week-to-week, and month-to-month basis. Why is it that banks don't seem to be capitalizing on this? We think it's because it's really hard to do. The technology is nascent and difficult to work with, but it's also dependent on that paradigm shift from product centricity to customer centricity first. So we're excited about this. It's coming. Banks are slowly shifting and the technology is slowly maturing, and we're ready to help drive this. The next idea is less focused on the customer and more on the agility of the organization, which I often refer to as System 1 decision making. The human brain is this amazing device that can switch between two modes of decision making. This concept was made popular by the Nobel Prize winning Daniel Kahneman in his book called Thinking Fast and Slow. These two modes of the brain are often referred to as System 1 and System 2. System 1 is responsible for what we might call the automatic functions, such as breathing, your ability to walk, being able to talk, keeping balance while riding a bicycle, kicking a soccer ball, etc. All of these require very little active thinking at all. The brain knows what to do and can take control of the situation, following a predetermined playbook for the action at hand, but nuanced in that it can be taught to allow for certain adjustment based on a sort of intuition learned from previous experiences. On the other hand, System 2 is responsible for accomplishing more analytical or unpracticed tasks, such as multiplying two numbers together, planning your next chess move, learning to play the guitar, or building a Lego set while following instructions. These are functions which are slower, more methodical, and require more reason and analysis. The really interesting part is that as you practice the task over and over, you get better at it. And why that is because what is happening is that your brain is slowly moving those functions from System 2 to System 1. And this is where you start to find mastery. I like to think about the System 1 and System 2 idea into thinking about organizations, because I think there are some similarities. Most organizations today make decisions primarily using System 2 type mechanisms: committees, policies and procedures, paperwork, analysis, emails, often heavily reliant on chains of individuals along the various business pathways within the organization. The benefit is often huge amounts of flexibility because processes can be changed on the fly to deal with different scenarios as they arise, but this agility comes at the cost of speed as we multiply the cost of each human step along a business process. And so often the solution is to try to automate and remove the human bottleneck along the path by replacing them with systems and things like robotic process automation, or RPA for short. These certainly do work for the repetitive tasks and can often reduce processing time from weeks to days or even to hours, but usually getting faster than that is incredibly difficult. And it never really feels like we come close to system one type decision making within an organizational context. We believe the fundamental issue to be that businesses are still very much built upon the concept of batch processing. Batches of data are processed and then move on to the next step as a complete batch. This is a good idea when humans are involved because humans have a very high startup cost. The cost to switch from one processing mode to another is generally much higher than a computer doing the same switch. And so when we automate these processes, we tend to carry that batch processing idea forward into the automated process too. So for me, the big challenge of cracking system one decision making within an organization is to shift fundamentally from a batch processing mode to what we call a real-time processing mode. Real-time processing means that a single item can be processed from beginning to end without ever having to form part of a batch. Although it sounds quite simple, this small idea has huge impact on architecture and systems. Because when you take it to its extreme and logical conclusion, it means that systems must be designed without any dependencies on each other. Data relating to the processing of a new item must already be present in the system, so that processing can occur with exactly zero waiting time. It's almost the idea of encoding a type of intuition within each processing step. So this sounds like a silver bullet, and maybe it is, and maybe we can't reasonably expect that every single future business process take exactly 0 seconds to execute. But what I believe is that the future of financial services is absolutely real time. Whether this becomes a key differentiator is yet to be seen. So my first idea was that organizations will become more customer centric, more personalized. The second idea was around organizations needing to build a sort of intuition within their processes in order to make really fast decisions. This last idea is focused on organizations making the right decisions. So that machine learning is the new utility, just like grid-based electricity and the printing press were the disruptive utilities of the modern age. So one of the easiest structures used by machine learning to understand, or certainly for me, is the neural network. It can sound like quite a scary structure initially, but it's actually not, and it's really easy to understand. It's simply an interconnected grid of nodes, starting from what is called an input layer, connected through a series of hidden layers to the eventual output layer. The nodes in the input layer represent the inputs to the network, which could be things like date of birth, gender, country of residence, your monthly salary, etc. Obviously, depending on what the situation is. The nodes of the output layer would be what you intend to predict, such as a yes-no type output, indicating whether this individual might take up a particular product, or a right, left, straight type output, if this was hooked up to the steering wheel of a self-driving car. So that's really easy to understand. Given these inputs, I want to predict these outputs. Now, the interesting bit is the network in between, and that's where the magic of machine learning comes in. The fundamental concept is that by teaching the machine repeatedly which inputs produce which outputs over and over and over, the machine can figure out the correct configuration of the hidden layers in between. Now, this completely relies on there being good data available to perform this training, data that already connects previous inputs to previous outputs, as well as needing this large amount of data. Our newly trained model is really only good at predicting this one thing. Give me these inputs and I can predict only these outputs. It really doesn't take into account any external factors, nor any interdependencies that might be going on outside of the model, obviously. This makes machine learning predictions pretty difficult to work with and inflexible because it's fundamentally backwards looking. What I'm looking for is something that can allow us to look forward into the future and allow us to make the best decision based on the factors we can see today. This is where I like to draw a distinction between what is prediction and what we call simulation. Instead of trying to predict the future based on the past, why not simply model all the internal and external forces, interactions, and dependencies of our business, and then use that model to run scenarios against in a sort of simulation mode? This would mean that we could simply set up our parameters of how we look today, load up a particular decision we think we would like to make, and then instantly fast forward into the future to see what that outcome is. If we don't like that outcome, just do it again with a different decision over and over and over until we find the best decision. Of course, this would be the perfect solution, and we wouldn't require any predictive modeling at all. However, on the downside, This would require absolutely huge amounts of computation to achieve with perfect accuracy. But maybe we're not really looking for perfect accuracy. We're just looking for something that is better than a prediction based on the past. We really want something which can be used to predict the outcome of a new idea or an opportunity which hasn't yet generated any real-world data sets to train upon. This, I think, is far more useful. So it sounds like this idea of simulation might be somehow opposed to machine learning, but really it isn't. And machine learning models might make up many pieces of that total simulation. Computation might be a problem, but we have access to huge amounts of CPU through cloud and special purpose GPU hardware. And hopefully soon we will start to see more access to quantum computing, of which the simulation idea could be a killer application. So it's best to start thinking about this sooner rather than later. So those are three interesting ideas. Put your customer in the middle of your world, develop a certain intuition inside your business processes so that you can do business at the speed of light, and then simulate every scenario so that you can make the right strategic investment decision every time. So in summary, this slide depicts our magical formula. Opportunity plus technology plus process equals future-proof. We stumble upon many opportunities as we operate the business today. We invest heavily in emerging technology. And then we have a bulletproof end-to-end process with automatic feedback loops, providing flexibility and agility. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope it was interesting.